Episode 286. Johnny Vedmore.
Johnny Vedmore, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Hello.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on today. I really did want to speak with you. You, of course, have a new bombshell article about Elon Musk and Jeffrey Epstein that came out today that I wanted to discuss. But before we get into that, just for folks who may not be familiar with you or Newspaste, could you just introduce yourself and kind of talk about the sort of stories that you cover and the sort of journalism you do?
Yeah, well, my name's Johnny Vedmore. I'm the founder of newspaste.com. I've worked for various sites, Unlimited Hangout, UK Column News. I tend to be much more independent. That's partially because of the stuff I write about. I write about usually intelligence-linked mobster type people. You know, the people who work in the shadow at creating our society. My focus is often on the hidden hand, how the training of young global elites happens in various sectors, not just within government, but in many different ways in technology as well, as we'll hear about this in this article. And I tend to try and find, you know, when people say, oh, what is a conspiracy? How can you prove a conspiracy? I always say, go back to the start, work your way forward in chronological order, put everything down on paper. And if there's a conspiracy, it will be glaring once you get down to it. So I'm a news hound. I'm a conspiracy hunter. I'm someone who tries to think outside the box. I don't tend to concentrate on what's trending at the time. I follow a thread. I have been doing that for possibly, I mean, it's about 7-8 years now that I've been writing down what I've been finding, but I've been doing it for a lot longer. So I'm an investigative journalist who's thorough, likes to work within history, likes to go back to the start, and I tend to cover things in detail. My articles are usually about 7,500 words plus, and contain masses of sources. I pride myself on the amount of good, solid sourcing within the article too.
Yeah, and obviously with this kind of stuff, when we're talking about Epstein, especially just because all the connections he has, but the World Economic Forum and these related subjects, there's just so many people involved and so many dates, and it's kind of a lot to go through. So I appreciate people like you who go through this and make it easily digestible for folks. But again, you have a new article that came out today talking about Elon Musk and focusing on sort of connections that he has with Jeffrey Epstein. Could you just kind of introduce us to sort of the subject matter and kind of walk us through what you have uncovered?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been looking for a while for connections between solid connections between people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, I've done a lot of work on the Jeffrey Epstein case, and I find that people concentrate mainly on the child trafficking side of it, which I can fully understand. But I've done quite a lot of that, and the more you dig into Jeffrey Epstein, the more you understand that there's actually a lot more involved than just the one side. He was a multifaceted operative. So one of the things he was an interlocutor, especially within science and power. And this article that I've written, which is called Musk and Epstein, the Third Culture Dossier, is really a mixture of that. It's how the technocratic elite of the here and now and the future were trained in a organization called Edge, which was at the time almost fully funded by Jeffrey Epstein and had been set up by a very interesting another interlocutor. I would describe both John Brockman, who set up Edge originally out of something that was called the Reality Club, that was a New York organization that was for intellectuals and elites of the scientific realm to converse in a very small space. The higher echelons, people like Dawkins, Dennett, and Steven Pinker would turn up from the 80s onwards and through the 90s and they would look at, or they would discuss science that maybe wasn't necessarily mainstream, but would eventually potentially be mainstream. But there was another
So this was
reason.
like a sort of like a think tank or something like that, where people would just get together and talk about futurism.
This was something much more. This was a paradigm setting tool. So the idea of Brockman, and something that he got instilled with very early on, is something that a guy called C.P. Snow wrote about in 1959 in a book called The Two Cultures. And basically he said that there was two cultures within the intellectual community, and they really could be split up in between the formal sciences and humanities. So you've got, physics, biologists, and chemists. They all understand these technical things, and on the other side, they're completely clueless about this other culture. These two distinct cultures emerge. And C.P. Snow said, he sat round in many intellectual gatherings, and he would ask scientists, human scientists, humanities scientists, scientists of the humanities. He'd ask them what the second law of thermodynamics was, and they would basically respond aggressively and angrily because they had no clue about it. And in the same way, the scientists on the other side had no clue about the works of Shakespeare, because he said, it's the akin and equivalent to that. And it became recognized that these two branches of science, so the people who build the social sciences as well, the political scientists, etc., don't have an understanding of basic, like, principles of physics, biology, and chemistry that would help them. And so they were trying to bridge a gap. C.P. Snow recognized that Brockman went on a mission to try and fill the gap. Now, he got inspired in the 1960s by a composer called John Cage, who's a very, very affluent, again, another kind of celebrity interlocutor on the New York scene, who were bringing people together. He would meet people, he would give them something that would change their life, and then he would never see them again. And he did this with John Brockman. He gave him a book called Cybernetics, and this started John Brockman's obsession with the cybernetic issue, I think he called it. And he went through his life then looking at this idea. Okay, you've got these two cultures of science, and they can't be connected necessarily, but maybe they could if you had something in between. And this is the way the mind of an interlocutor works. The connection in between is what makes it important. And he saw that technology could potentially fill out the gap between the two cultures of science that were of the intellectual world, which would then allow for other things to happen. And other things means, a lot of nefarious stuff, because as soon as you start to redefine the rules, the people who play by the current rule base are not completely happy about that. It's obviously there's going to be a pushback. And this is the same as we enter into technocracy. As they studied the future and looked into what science would look like in the future, and what technology would be available in the future, and where we were in physics and biology and maths, people started to work. They realized they needed to design a future that was really, unique, intricate, that played a part with technology and with other scientific endeavors, and crossed over boundaries, and learned how to get to the people who are going to be creating the technology, the actual scientists, how they were going to be massively important in creating this big megacity society of the future. And if that's the case, and they need to be working together, and they need to be thinking together. And that led to him creating first Reality Club, which then eventually merged into Edge. Edge was created in 1988, but the rise of the internet, Edge.org being created, suddenly Brockman said, "Okay, we'll throw that all online now, so everybody can see it, and we'll attract the biggest names in science." They did. They attracted the biggest name. By the end of the 90s, Brockman was running the billionaires' dinners. And first of all, it was a millionaires' dinner, but they realized too many people would turn up. They didn't want millionaires. Millionaires were like the poor people, the paupers who didn't know that much compared to them. If you could make $1 billion, it means you know how to use your mind, and so it became the billionaires' dinner, and there was a lot of big names who would turn up, and we've seen lots of the photos, and we've seen it's around this time in the late 90s that Jeffrey Epstein started really getting involved with this. He had a real interest in cybernetics, future technologies, investing, or everything in investment in the 80s and 90s was which technology are you going to invest in the future? I mean, people don't really understand why he was involved in technology. Well, because he worked for the banks, and the banks were all invested in the different technologies that would make them billions, and it did. It did make them billions.
Right, and that was kind of like part of like the dot-com bubble around that time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, well, they saw that coming. I mean, I've talked about this on a few places where, if you think the Reality Club was set up in 1981, Usenet, the precursor to the internet, was like 1982, and these sort of intellectuals all talk to each other. I mean, this is what the article goes into as well, is the past of intellectual communication too. Things like the Invisible College of the 17th century, the Republic of Letters, which was an attempt to get intellectuals to communicate with each other via letter writing in the 1800s. There's been these efforts to combine and fuse science of all type so that those in control can really either keep control and affect proper change. That's what they're looking to do. And you can understand the mindset is to affect proper change. But by the 90s, we were about to enter into a different change. 1994, well, in the early 90s, Tim Berners-Lee was the one, I think it was 1991, where he actually announced the creation of the World Wide Web on Usenet. So all of these people who were watching that technology rise knew what it would look like. It would look like communication across a great distance. It would mean complete, revolutionary in exchange of information. And that's really what they wanted. So the World Wide Web went along with that. Eventually, we see that there was a transition from the old world to the new world, and Edge was right on the forefront of that.
So Epstein got involved with this group around that time. Could you just talk about some of the other connections that he started making around this time?
Yeah, well, I mean, the 90s was in the late 80s. Wexner came into Epstein's life. Maxwell's came into Epstein's life. Both Robert and Ghislaine Maxwell come into Epstein's life. He had already smuggled guns for Iran-Contra from 1980 onwards. So he was obviously working at a high level.
Like I don't think I've heard that before. Is that like a well-documented fact? Or
it's fairly well documented. I mean, you'll find a passage about it in One Nation Under Blackmail, volume 2, I think, maybe, because he was working with Adnan Khashoggi. The Iran-Contra affair, the Iran side of it, I mean, the hostages got seized in 1979. The American hostages got held. There was an election coming up next year. It was Carter versus Reagan, with the former CIA director George Bush running along as vice president, and Bush and Reagan's team went surreptitious, intelligence went straight in the back door and said, "Don't hand the hostages over to America until after the election, so that they would have an October surprise and they would be able to sway the election." And in return, a group of people, including Stanley Pottinger, who ended up being one of the key lawyers for Epstein's victims, for the bulk of Epstein's victims, and Cyrus Hashemi organized, along with his brother Jamshid Hashemi, organized nearly the majority of this along through Khashoggi, funded by Epstein and others. So they were all working on Iran-Contra, and that was 1980 onwards that he was already working in these scenes. And I mean, New York, you can imagine, these guys are getting kickbacks from doing all of these major CIA operations. Eventually, nearly the majority majority of that information came out in the October Surprise Task Force of 1993, where Congress literally went through all of the details, interviewed person after person. So there's loads of documented evidence to what happened at that time. And at the same time, there was federal agencies who were wiretapping the phones of Stanley Pottinger and Cyrus Hashemi. So they were able to gather loads of information. Everybody knew who everybody was by that point. You know, a lot of this was agencies in the 80s playing off each other and trying to get a little bit of extra collateral over each other for use in behind the scenes. And like with Stanley Pottinger, when he was when he was named in the New York Times as being part of Iran-Contra gun smuggling, and obviously being a CIA agent in some level, it was Rudy Giuliani, Southern District. He's at there, the Southern District of New York, saying, "Oh, I'm gonna we'll look into Stanley Pottinger," but then he goes off to Mexico. All of these guys, you know, sort out their troubles, and by this time they've all got lots of money to invest. And Epstein's obviously got an extremely, like, he's well known by this point within the New York clique, and that was where it was happening. Wexner moved to New York. I think he moved to New York in about 1987. He like relocated for a while. He didn't really, I don't think he really liked New York, but it was necessary during that time to start building up something else. And this was like, in part, something that was about Israel behind the scenes as well, because Les Wexner was really like pushing for more Israeli expansion, but behind the scenes. So anything they could navigate people towards within the intelligence communities in America was useful. And they
Did
needed
Epstein
people to...
meet Wexner first or Maxwell?
I think he met Wexner first. I think it was about 1987, 1988, and it would be around the same time that he met Maxwell, because Maxwell, I think they met in about 1988. It was and then like her father dies like not long afterwards, and
Right,
they
where he
basically
got
throw
he
in
fell
lots.
off of a yacht.
Yeah, he fell off. Some guy in a bush came up with a blowpipe, went, and he went, oh, and fell off into the yacht. No, you know, it's pretty clear that Robert Maxwell had caused a hell of a lot of trouble for a lot of big players in all across the world. He was skimming he was skimming off the top so much that eventually he was just skimming everything. And he was just had he was such a greedy man. He was such a greedy man. It was always going to end badly for him, but I don't think he would have lasted much longer anyway, because he was enormous by that stage. I mean, he was,
I think he was elderly too, right?
yeah, and he was living off caviar and champagne. That was it. You know, people were just bringing him good stuff all of the time, and he had made so many enemies. It was pretty clear that he had stolen a load of pension funds. He had stolen, he had like given it all over to Israel or something along these lines. He was involved in the Promise software. You know, I know loads about the Maxwells, but it's like blotchy compared to a lot of my knowledge about other people within this realm. But I mean, the Promise software was really important. That was him working with intelligence networks again, with the idea computers building backdoors into computer software, and all of these people knew where the money was. In actual fact, you know, in this course, in this edge course that Elon Musk goes through, Jeff Bezos is also there as well. And Jeff Bezos at this time is working at DE Shaw, which owns 5 to 10% of the New York Stock Exchange. He gets up to vice president there, and they're basically revolutionizing everything. And DE Shaw is creating the heads of all of the major technological corporations of the future. He lifts up, Jeff Bezos leaves DE Shaw, goes to Amazon, builds up this rumor about how he's selling books at the back of his car, when in actual fact he's one of the richest men in one of the richest hedge funds. Haley Miner, who set up CNET, download.com, you know, they had already mapped out what the internet looked like, and they just started putting their executives into position to control the main where the corporations would be biggest, and so a lot of this was just money.
So you're saying, for example, like Amazon was that was not organic. That was something that was kind of pre-planned, that they are going to become this giant online retailer.
Yeah, I covered it in an article for called David Shaw and the Rise of Jeff Bezos, where I look at the story that he gives out. I mean, they had people write loads of books throughout the late 90s and early noughties about his selling books out the back of cars, etc. It wasn't. He was vice president of D.E. Shaw. He went to David Shaw and was like, "Okay, it's time to set up Amazon now." David Shaw was different, and I mean, every single article or book you read about David Shaw's enterprise at this time, they were different than everybody else. That you would walk in there, it wasn't like trading floors where people are shouting, or hedge funds where people are shouting and screaming over the phones at each other, etc. This was people. David Shaw employed people like Jeff Bezos without a role in mind. They'd employ them and then they decide what best suited their abilities, and instantly like they were looking at creating they were using game theory to map out the technology of the future just at the start, but just before the internet's created. So these are people who are probably intelligence linked. That I can back up as well by saying David Shaw became went into the White House under Bill Clinton, writing policy papers very early on, and he wasn't only hanging around with these people who would also be within intelligence within New York. He was also in the White House under the command of what I think is is really openly CIA leader Bill Clinton. I mean, he had so many roots within the agency. By the time he got into power, he was then this is really important. Bill Clinton was putting into action something called third way politics, which had been imagined in the same sort of like areas by a guy called Anthony Giddens. It was it was a way to pull the left and right into the center, and to fill up policy with whatever you want to. It's like a dream for politicians. They don't have to look after their base. They can just fill up all of the empty bits of policy that are no longer there because you're not using policy from the left or the right. They can fill those up with austerity and war. And third way politics is a very interesting way to marry up the center left and center rights. New Democrats was based on third way politics. New Labour was based on third way politics. And John Brockman, who brought Anthony Giddens into EDGE, this organization funded by Jeffrey Epstein, also was developing at this same time the third culture. And the third culture was a way to create the people who were going to be in charge of the technology that would mold and put together the two intellectual bases: the political science that would control people, and the technology that could be used to keep those people under control and change their behavior when necessary.
Hey Radicals, I hope that you're all enjoying this interview. As you know, this is the start of my spectacular 10th season. This is going to be a big one. We have lots of big returning guests, lots of new guests as well. So really want to make sure that it's great. Please do help support the show if at all possible. You can do that in a few different ways. You can like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me across all different social media networks. And also, if at all possible, please do consider financially supporting the show. You can do that at patreon.com/PrimoRadical. When you become a patron, you can submit questions to all of my guests, so please do consider that. That's only $1 a month. Please also consider sending super chats and super thanks, and make sure again that you're just following me across all different social media networks. Thanks again, folks, for the last 9 years of support, and again, I'm looking forward to making this a great 10th season. So again, in regards to Elon Musk, could you kind of detail how he came into this EDGE group, and any kind of connections that he would have then to Epstein?
Yeah, it was really. This is a really interesting time. Elon Musk himself has left out little bits of his backstory. So if you go to his the web archives, and you go to Zip2Net, where he was working in the late 90s, where he was heading in the late 90s, you'll see that on the about page, it says that he worked for various companies, including Microsoft. And I think there was probably a Microsoft training program, leadership training program, sometime in the mid-90s that happened after Bill Gates took part in the World Economic Forum, Young Global Leaders. It was Global Leaders for Tomorrow at the start, but he took part in that in 1993. And I think there was lots of leadership courses that were looking for young people and young talent at this time. And Elon Musk was obviously spotted very early. So it's not a surprise he ends up within Edge. But for the first part, his mum is a PR wizard. May Musk, she knows her stuff when it comes to creating an image. And she created Elon Musk into being an image that was carefully protected. The first time he starts getting involved in Edge that we know about, and that must be said that we know about, was as representing Tesla and SpaceX in 2008. But when people talk about Musk with Epstein, they talk about the 2011 billionaires dinner. And I was looking for some sort of like photographic evidence. I found the photographic evidence. I found a picture of Zach Bogue, the Edge billionaires dinner in 2011. On the one side is a blurry Jeffrey Epstein, and just over 2.5 meters away with his back turned on another table is Elon Musk. He was at this event, and BuzzFeed News talk about this, he was at this event. But if you went back onto the archives on edge.org, you would discover that it wasn't the first time he was there. And these people at this event in this 2011 billionaires dinner, these were the top people. Jeff Bezos is there, Nathan Mervoid, who's part of Intellectual Ventures that has like 70,000 patents and patent pending at the highest level of technology. Sergey Brin, head of Google, people like the head of YouTube, the head of 23andMe. These are all the top guys in a room in 2011. So I think people got distracted by that. And they were like, oh, Elon Musk was in a room with him, but that's all we know. But if you actually go back, you could discover that Elon Musk went through an Edge masterclass. And this is really where the story is, because this Edge masterclass isn't just anything. It's Richard Thaler, who's the father of behavioral economics, which is, in my opinion, for sure, I can say this is a part opinion, but I mean, if you study it, it's not long before it's your opinion too, because the facts are there. It's a way to change your behavior through economics. And that isn't just a tiny little thing. That's not in a little area. That isn't confined to just economics. It becomes just behavioral change. And once you have the access to do this at a technological level where it's online and it's constant, it means that you're basically using psyops on people to make them choose, to make them make the decision you want them to make, to have the behaviors you want them to have. So it's not just about swaying people's credit card usage or making people more environmentally friendly. There's a real sharp end to this stick, and they all start to realize it. And in 2008, Richard Thaler comes out with a book called Nudge, which is about and which leads to Obama and Cameron bringing them into their administrations to create things like the Behavioral Insight Team, which used psychological nudges to change people's behavior. Now, in this 2008 book, they see people as two separate entities. They see econs and humans. Econs are people who they would just need to put up tax on sugar and they'll stop buying as much sugar. But humans need to be nudged to stop buying more sugar. They can't just be, they don't just react to what the economy is. So behavioral economics straight away there is, oh, we know these guys. This is behavioral economics. These are the econs. We can change them just by changing their behavior, just by changing the economy. But then these other guys, the humans, and the humans are dangerous because it's hard to change their behavior because they want to do what they want to do. They don't want to do what we wanted them to do, but we want them to do this. So we're going to have to find different ways to make them feel like people around them hate them, are disgusted by them, are repulsed by their behavior, so that they will change their behavior. And what happens within that is a melting pot of anger, turning people against each other, making a society where you're electing people who will then have control of telling you what to do rather than you telling the elected officials what to do. And that dynamic is what behavioral economics changes. It makes a democratic society totally undemocratic because you can't have freedom of speech if things are being put in your mouth. And that's what behavioral economics does. It makes you say things, it makes you do things, it makes you act a certain way. And it's
And
not
that's very
just
interesting too
economics.
when you consider, all of the rhetoric around Elon Musk purchasing Twitter and rebranding as X because it's supposed to be for free speech, right?
Mhm. And if you think about that in more detail, you start to realize, wait a minute. Okay, so who were these people who were on this masterclass funded by Jeffrey Epstein through a Jeffrey Epstein? That's amazing. Elon Musk goes through multiple courses in a masterclass run by the father of behavioral economics, and some other psychologists. Daniel Kahneman's one of them. He's a cognitive psychologist. They're after changing people's behavior. Who are they? Who are these people? Why are they so important? Why are there 8 to 10 people in a room learning this? And who are they? Oh, they're going to be in the future the heads of the CEOs and heads of Google, of Facebook, of Twitter, X, of all of the social media platforms. They're at the highest level, and they're being taught how to control and manipulate people's behavior
Was
back
Peter
then.
Thiel involved with this too, by any chance?
Yes. Peter Thiel it was involved at a distance, not through Edge directly itself. Peter Thiel always is a hands-off guy with someone else dealing. Sean Parker was working, who was the founder of Napster, and was heavily invested in Facebook, was also at Discourse, and Sean Parker alongside Elon Musk, and Sean Parker is representing Thiel's Founders Fund as well. So it's very clear that Peter Thiel knows how to keep his distance from this. But Peter Thiel also, I mean, he borrowed a load of money, or they helped raise funds, should we say, for another Musk project at another time. There's always been, there's not much difference between these guys. They have to remain looking separate, because otherwise you realize that 8 of them get together in a room and plan how to manipulate you through psychology.
Mm. Well, I guess I asked about Thiel because, we're seeing this very odd push in favor of Donald Trump from these Silicon Valley folks like Elon Musk, like Peter Thiel. Obviously, JD Vance as well. He had a connection to Peter Thiel and to Palantir. I know Trump also, he had connections with Epstein and Maxwell. What are your just general thoughts on what's happening there?
I think we're entering into the technocracy, and the technocrats were always going to take over, and those who are currently in positions of political power and have been not, they're not fighting against technocrats because they have a different idea ahead of them. They're fighting against them because they're, full of hubris and ego and just want win and just want the power. And it's a load of power hungry people, but the technocrats are going to win out. They're already in control. They're able to sway people's minds by using social media platforms. So as soon as all of these people are in a room together and getting the same party together, and then are also telling you how to think at the same time through their platforms, they've got complete power and control. So these guys, to politicians who want to gain power, that's enormous. If you can get the guy on your side who can sway 100 million people by putting by algorithmically on a social media platform and has that sort of sway and power, you are winning elections. You are winning elections hand down. You are probably going to end up with landslide victories eventually, where people believe they're voting for something, that they believe they know what it is, but in actual fact, they've been manipulated by technology. And here it is. This is the crux of it. This is the scientists using the technology they're in charge of to control our society, real social political level. That is so dangerous. Not only is like Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, not only is he someone who has control over one of the biggest platforms, which he seeks to be the everything app, and will you everything you do will go through. You know, the equivalent of the Chinese WeChat, but he's also heading towards government. And that is just wealth, real power to sway minds, and then politics. That's dangerous. That is and that's dangerous because they're so powerful, and that's why they're entering in. That's why they're being. I mean, I would say J.D. Vance is just a diplomat on behalf of Peter Thiel that's being placed into a front-facing role. So he is just like just an envoy, really, of one of the other someone who needs to stay out of the limelight and will use lots of other people, to look like it's not him acting. But Peter Thiel is very much behind so much of what's going on at the moment, and it's a complicated time. I mean, as I've released this, it's what, 5 days towards the election. I know that there's going to be a load of Trump fans who aren't very happy with me releasing information about how someone who's aligned with Trump is basically the devil, the techno devil.
That's kind of the interesting thing about the dynamics of how Trump is being marketed as well, right? Because he's this populist and he's standing up against even these, Bush Cheney era neocons. So in theory, you can see where a lot of normal, average, even anti-war people would get behind him. But again, you are seeing this odd phenomena of these technocrats all getting behind Trump. So I guess, I mean, politically too, if Kamala Harris was to win, is that a good thing? Would that help keep these technocrats out of power, or are you seeing similar things happening on the Democratic side?
Yeah, I think there's 2 degrees of separation between those evil neocon manipulators behind the scenes who, in places like the Alliance for Securing Democracy and etc., and the technocrats. Is one of the people who is in business with Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Jeffrey Epstein at one point as well, was a woman called Nicole Youngkerman, and they set up Carbine 911, which was an Ehud Barak company that was basically out of Unit 8200 sort of guys on the top. Once I run an article exposing all of that, they changed all of their boards of directors, and the board of directors include people like Michael Chertoff. So they're just putting the neocons in place. So they are the same. They don't care who they use. The technocrats don't have any empathy for humanity. They have empathy for technology. This is what people don't really kind of understand, and that means it doesn't matter which humans they use to get their ends, to meet their ends. They're going to use any humans. Humans are dispensable. Humans are disposable. There's something of the past which we're going on, and we're creating a better future for them in their mind. That's what they're doing. So I think there's not much separation between the neocon world and this. The illusion that we say, you're voting for the lesser of 2 evils. You're voting for evil. Somewhere in there is the controlling hand pushing these people into directions. That includes Trump. I quite like Trump. He's been enjoyable to watch. He's been enjoyable. He's like,
working at McDonald's and driving around in a garbage truck.
Yeah, but he makes politics look ridiculous as it is. So he's out of most of the politicians, he is the most honest in that sense. He knows that it's a game, and he plays the game openly as though it's a game. And we all laugh. Some people go, "Oh my God, that's terrible," because he's breaking the fourth wall in a sense. He's looking directly at the camera, and that is something that they don't like, because they want to keep playing the game and pretending. They want to do their January the 6th, do their little bits and bobs to make people, to drive people to one way or the other and to think different ways. This is what they were doing before, but they were using politics, events, feds, stuff like this, people on the ground. Now they can do this with technology. So why would you still? So in a sense, the one side, the Kamala Harris, that sort of like side, you could say, well, they're the old school who will use different underhand means that are much more of the physical realm to make you do something and manipulate you and coerce you and threaten you and blackmail you and all of that. The technocrats will just use computers to do the same thing. They will just use technology to manipulate you, to blackmail you, to push you into. So they're the
Well, I mean,
same.
could you give an example of how we're seeing that play out? I mean, again, I understand Elon Musk owns Twitter now, and he's probably controlling the narrative in some way there. But are there like any kind of concrete examples that you can give of how they're doing this sort of nudging?
Well, I mean, that's one of the. If you look at the development of X under Elon Musk, you have to look at. You've got this For You section that's come up. That's a very nice way to nudge people. Instantly, you're looking at what they want you to look at. It's come up to election time. I go on the For You section. Every third one is Elon Musk. Before it wasn't. Before election time, it's a load of other people. During election time, it gets down to a point where I'm going down the For You section and it's just rows of Elon Musk's tweets. So they've got the same mechanism of control that the Alliance for Secure Democracy was using with Hamilton 68. And that was a nudge as well. Now, whether nudges is censorship, they used censorship to nudge people's behavior. They used fear to nudge people's behavior. Whereas this regime of Twitter are using something much more subversive. They use your analytics against you. And so at the same time, you don't underestimate the value on X of different changes that have been made. Like likes, taking away seeing what people like what. They know what you like, but they have all of this information. They are garnering all of this information. They're collating all this information. We don't have this information. That's part of the taking away information so they control it and you don't. And then they know what you like, and you're more likely to tell them what you like if you think no one else knows. You're more likely to like something that you may, if you knew everybody else saw you liking it, you may go, oh, I don't want to do that. So you no longer have that feeling of social pressure, but instead you have the panopticon pressure. You have this panopticon digital panopticon looking at everybody as though they're in their individual cells and their information. A lot of this is about information and the access to it. And what he's trying to do at the moment on X is get people, especially a lot of people, into rooms who are like-minded, and we have X spaces, which are very clever. They're very clever little like places where you go and you get pushed by certain and nudged by all of those around you. You have a load of people who are really outspoken about things, but they all kind of pressurize each other into going along with a narrative. And there's a load of paid actors who are clearly in there keeping the narrative going in one direction. If that's the selection of tools you've got, a load of people who you can pay to go in and get everybody to speak about certain things and to distract people when they're speaking about other things and stop them speaking about other things, those are nudging. That's nudging. Those are ways to nudge people to say, oh, look, you've got a negative response from saying this thing. You say it less. Or you have a positive response for saying this thing. You'll say it more. So it's a reward. It's a reward punishment thing going on, but it's less punishment than it was on under the previous guise. So it's hard for us to see. It's hard for me to describe, but look at the changes, look at how it works, look at your own interaction with it, and then go on to the videos. Start scrolling through the videos. You go like, oh, video I'm interested in, murder, death, fighting,
There is a lot of fighting videos, actually.
Yeah,
I have noticed that.
just constant violence. When I used to go, when I was about 14, I live in Cardiff. Cardiff is a place where it's got universities of all types, including psychology universities. University of Psychology in Cardiff used to the students used to put up little like flyers where you could go and you could take part in their tests or experiments, not like anything like where you're being buzzed or anything, but where you're like pressing and you're making a decision between two things and you see pictures on the screen and you're reacting to how you feel about them, etc. And they'd give you a couple of quid for doing that when you could do it from when you were about 14. So me and my mates used to go down there and make cigarette money so that we could bar from down the shop. And what it was very similar. It was this, they were giving you sad face, happy face, sad face, sad face, happy face, sad face, happy face. You're pressing a button. That's the same. Anger, hatred, anger, happiness, anger, 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 and it's nearly all anger. And then when he very much put his foot out, Elon Musk put his foot out and said, I'm standing with Israel, I'm going to do the whole tours, hang around with Ben Shapiro, be all pro-Israel, meet with Netanyahu and all of this. When he did all of that openly and bowed the knee, you saw the entirety of X and every single post change to being pro-Zionist content being pushed at you again through the same areas. This at the same time, you're made to think that he's giving you freedom of speech, but they're putting the things in your head and you don't realize it's happening. And we want to feel like we're strong enough to resist this, but that's not how psychology works. However much we want to believe that we're the strongest people mentally in the world, we're capable of all of the same issues that everybody else gets if we get the same exposure to the same psychological stresses or same psychological triggers. And that's what X is. It's a perfect way, and social media is in general a perfect way to give people the triggers they want to push people into behaving and acting in a certain way. And again, behavioral economics, if you change people's behavior, it doesn't always have to be change it to be positive. You're changing people to hate other people. That's not positive. And that's what they've done. They talk about it in detail. It's not only changing behavior isn't only about making everybody happy and making it all a rainbow and everybody skips down the road. A lot of this is they go, well, for instance, in the masterclass, the third masterclass in this Edge series by Sendil Mullinath and Richard Thaler, where Elon Musk is on the psychology of scarcity. And they say, poverty is really bad and everything, but there's a lot to learn about people's behavior when they're poor. When they're poor, there's things that we can learn that can, yes, okay, it's...
So poverty is like a social experiment?
But yeah, you make people poor, you can control them easier. The psychology of scarcity means that people's behavior are easy to find what they call interventions, write up interventions for this behavior, because they can map it out much more if people are poor. This has been something that the elites always come down to. They always find a way to say, if we impoverish everybody else, we have the power. And that works upon a psychological level, of course. That's why it works anyway. And so once you get into really concentrating on the psychological nuts and bolts of that, it means you can twist people's minds by using poverty, and easier than you can if they've got money. So, and this comes out in like basic examples. So a basic example would be if a government gave a lump sum, and this is something they use, Thaler uses as an example. If you give a lump sum to people, they're more likely to spend it all at once. They're more likely, to save it, because they get a lump sum. They're more likely to put it in the bank and say, oh, I got that lump sum on top, I'll put it aside. But the government doesn't want you to save the money. They want you to spend the money. So they'll say, oh, we'll give you that. And they'll give you it in little bits, incremental bits, because they know you will spend it then. So they are controlling what you're doing with the thing that you're supposed to be getting, that you have freedom to use. What really it is like that works upon levels all across the spectrum, and a lot of it is to do with our living situations. And if they can control it better by us being poor, they're going to make us poor. And what do we see outside in the world? We're seeing events happening to make us poorer. Like mass migration is a way that will make the native populations of every country poorer. They've mapped this out. They know about this. Eric Weinstein, who went to Edge, actually wrote a 2-year sponsored UN paper on this between 2000 and 2002 that mapped it out in detail and said the native population will get poorer. Now, if they know that, then the next stage they look at it and they go, okay, we've got a load of poor people. How can we benefit from that? And this is what they do in government. This is what they do with policy. This is what intellectuals do. This is what they do when they get into a room and they think, okay, we're the ones designing society. So how can we best get other people to do what we say?
Well, Johnny Vedmore, I know we're kind of just scratching the surface here, and we could probably go on for a while. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. For just though, for anybody who is curious about this article, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you think is really important and something that they would find interesting about it?
Yeah, there's loads of people involved in it. There's and it'll help you understand things like third way politics, as well as third culture. It'll help you understand that conspiracy. And this is one thing that I really want people to take away from it. Someone asked me recently, "How do you tell if something is really a conspiracy, though?" And I said to them, it's like the article I'm looking at now, this article. You go back to the start. And people have got to learn. You go back to the start of something and work your way forward, you get the answers. That's it. You just map out what's happening in chronological order. This maps out the rise of the people who are in power now and how they started off by deciding how to manipulate our psychology en masse. And that, I think, should worry absolutely everyone. That should concern every single person who lets their kid on Facebook or YouTube or the like, because they got to know that in doing that, in having free access without understanding and without sorting out this issue, those people who were in that room were in control of how your kid's going to feel, what they're gonna see, and how they're gonna be pushed, and that means something for the future. We during lockdowns, what happened? The whole social media world turned on us, cracked down, and it shows that they had complete power of authoritarian control, and they all started nudging our behavior. Every time they want an excuse to change our society, they will find an excuse, and they will do it subversively, hidden. And it's a brave new world. We're entering into a point where this is fifth generation warfare happening as we speak, and that's the main thing that people should go away thinking is that how do I now decipher information, and should I take extra time to think about whether or not something is actually good for me? Be rational, be logical, because all of the people who are doing this to you, they're using that rationality, they're using that logic. And like one of the main things is, of course, you want to be able to tell your politicians what to do, not for your politicians to tell you what to do. That's a basic. And that's what people should really be thinking. If I'm voting for someone into power and they have the ability to twist my mind in everyday life, then I'm entering into a very dangerous contract, and I'm always going to be the loser.
Well, Johnny, again, I really appreciate you being on the show today. And again, sorry we didn't have more time to go through everything. I'd love to have you back on in the future to talk about these topics. You're obviously very very well read on these, and very intelligent. So again, I appreciate you being on the show today. For folks out there who would like to follow you and support you, how can they do that?
Yeah, go to newspaste.com. Newspaste is my base, and you can find links to Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Ko-Fi. You can find other support structures there. I do need help. Like, it's so hard living in this realm where you're working 12 to 16 hours a day sometimes, and you're trying to do something positive, but no one really wants to pay for that. So I really do need help. And yeah, I'm on X a lot. So if you want to just DM me, my DMs are always open, and I'm always happy to chat with people.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time. I really do appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully I can have you back on sometime soon.
Thanks for having me.